So Canada is a place where you pay more for your cell phone bill than practically anywhere else in the world, but somehow Tech Savvy is looking for a buyer. Canada is a place where the price of bread is literally fixed, but grocery CEOs defend responsible profitability. Canada is also a place where Canada's largest tech company offers new products to its merchants all around the world, except in Canada. Why? Well, as one Canadian CEO put it to me, there's not a single Canadian company that could have competitively bid for the work. Why? Because there's still no open banking framework. Now, as a business tech reporter, this stuff is very, very interesting. As a Canadian citizen, it is infuriating. It's the reason why we made these free Boswell t-shirts, because we want Canada's competition commissioner to, be allowed to enforce competition in Canada. Somebody get this man a badge and a gun, lest we all be robbed by the 3 telecoms in a trench coat, or the 3 banks in a trench coat, or whatever version of that tired joke is most applicable today. Well, Matthew Boswell joins us on the podcast this week in an interview recorded just hours before news broke that Torstar and Postmedia were exploring a merger. But as Boswell notes, competition is about a lot more than preventing those mergers. And as he explains on the podcast, preventing those anti-competitive mergers is pretty hard to do because the way our system is constructed, it's not really about ensuring our economy stays competitive, just that the lessening happens at a steady pace, especially if it's outweighed by business efficiencies. Forget the badge and a gun. Somebody get Commissioner Boswell some changes to the Competition Act. Let's dig in. All right, so this has been a long time coming. We're very happy to have you here. I would say, to our credit, we have had a lot of prominent people on this podcast, but you are the first person that we've ever made a t-shirt for. I think we're going to get into that and why we're excited to have you. But I think it's important to maybe start and level set and have you describe to our audience from your perspective what your job is. Because I don't think enough people know about you and your job and how important it is. So we should start there before we move forward.
Okay. Well, my job title is Commissioner of Competition for Canada. And in that job, I run an organization called the Competition Bureau of Canada that administers and enforces the Competition Act and 3 other labeling laws. And to put it very simply, we're it for competition law enforcement and competition promotion in Canada, coast to coast to coast. So we do 2 things, as I say. We enforce the law as it exists, and we promote competition in all corners of the Canadian economy to drive productivity, to drive innovation, to push for lower prices for consumers, more choice, better quality. Fundamentally, competition is a key pillar, if not the key pillar, of a well-functioning capitalist society where you have healthy, vigorous competition. So that's what we do here, 24/7. Well, maybe not 24/7, but a lot of the time, we're totally focused on Canada having competitive markets and bringing the law to bear on those that choose to engage in anti-competitive conduct.
Okay, so I want to get to the law stuff, and important to note, as you said, as it stands today into bear. But first, I want to talk about the promotion component. Which is weird that I would lean into any guest being like, it's our job to promote this. And I'm like, yes, tell me more. But, we've had Vas Bednar on this podcast a few times, noted policy wonk. I think she's a fan of yours. She's part of the Boz hive a little bit. And often in her circles and amongst a certain, I don't want to say intelligentsia, people who subscribe to news publications, there's a common refrain, a common joke of Canada being, pick your 3 companies in a trench coat by industry, right? And telecoms, whatever. I'm not going to name any because the joke works for basically any Canadian industry. I think Canadians are subconsciously familiar with that, but it's rare that this tension between how we're set up with competition comes, into the day-to-day life. So I'm wondering if you could actually talk to us a little bit about like why you feel competition is important for Canadians at a day-to-day level. Like, how does this impact them? Because it's one thing. Yes, every once in a while we found out that there's some the bread was more expensive by design. I'm sure everyone's seen the news about various mergers between telecoms, but then there's also things like tech savvy's looking to sell. There's these moments in time that people like me pay close attention to. And then there are certain things that as consumers, Canadians will get very upset about, but maybe in isolation, and they're not seeing the whole picture. So why, you're talking about like competition in markets, and that's all very, innovation policy and economic policy, like brass tacks. How does this impact the now, 40 million Canadians that we have across this country day to day?
Okay. Can I just back up a bit and say that I don't necessarily agree with you that this isn't on Canadians' minds all the time. Nowadays, I think we're at a watershed moment in Canada where there is widespread awareness of the importance of competition. There was a poll last summer that 88% of Canadians agreed that Canada needs more competition. And it's an issue that even in my time as commissioner is in the papers, on the news, on the internet, much more frequently, almost a daily basis, where there's issues where Canadians are clamoring for more competition. And why does it matter? I mean, let's just take it right down to everybody's daily life. Competition, as I said earlier, drives lower prices. It drives better service. It drives more innovative products, new products, more choice in products, more quality in products. It is like all day long, we are feeling the effects of either a good competitive environment or a bad competitive environment. And people, quite frankly, this is my assessment, people in Canada are sort of at their wits' end about many areas of our economy having a lack of competition, and seeing it and how it impacts their pocketbook, how it impacts the level of service they get every day, and there's a high level of frustration.
Well, so what do you think is impacting maybe because I would agree with you, it's much more present now. There seems to be certain things. What do you think is driving that? Because, from the telecom perspective, the lack of competition there, everyone's frustrated with their bill, some of the most expensive prices ever, and then the same old justifications about we're a big country, we've got the best networks, and from my personal beat, I think we're very focused on open banking not happening, and that being an entryway for greater competition because it allows new entrants to actually compete on products, because they just don't. We talk to so many fintech startups and they're like, we literally aren't being allowed. We're not given the tool sets to compete with the banks, which are some of the lowest favorable ranked types of organizations in Canada, along with telecoms. But that's been the case for an incredibly long time. Do you think, was there something maybe related to COVID in terms of people's pocketbooks being a little bit tighter, so they were paying close attention? Was there a particularly egregious moment where you feel like things might have changed? Because obviously you're in relation to promotion, you're paying attention to sentiment, and I would assume how impactful the promotion is going. Where was the moment for you where you saw a significant delta? Because the last time we had Vass on, we were lamenting the fact that we couldn't, that we might need a Canadian heritage moment for competition to get everyday Canadians to understand that this isn't the way that other countries live.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I can identify a particular moment, but what I can say with great confidence is that in the last 3 years, it's been on a steady uphill climb. The public awareness and the public, I don't know, maybe anger is not the right word to use, but dissatisfaction with the current state of affairs in Canada. Canadians are pretty worldly people. They, at least in my view, they pay attention to the news around the world, what's going on in other countries, and they see things happening all over the world in competition, like dramatic seismic shifts in how countries are dealing with competition.
Mm.
I mean, you don't have to look much further than the United States. President Biden, when he came in, an executive order on competition for all levels of the federal government in the United States, directing all the leaders of the various departments to look for ways to enhance competition, creating a competition council in the White House. You know, very proactive steps. For the first time since the 70s, competition was referenced in the State of the Union speech by President Biden. And of course, he has the famous tagline of capitalism without competition isn't capitalism, it's exploitation. So, Canadians see this. Canadians see what the Europeans are doing with the Digital Markets Act and the, steady stream of cases against big tech platforms for anti-competitive conduct. They see what's going on around the world.
Okay, so that's, hey, I'll take whatever catalyst is there, but it seems like we're touching upon that other third rail of Canadian politics, is that if other countries are doing it before us, we're either motivated or more comfortable to follow. But I'll take it. I'm wondering, maybe, this is a good way to transition now into like the enforcement, like how you engage with this stuff. And this is going to be a very branching conversation. I want to talk about some of the revisions. I want to talk about the work that you've been doing with, or I guess the newly announced Canadian Digital Regulators Forum, like this group, because again, there's a layer of bureaucracy, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, that facilitates some of the stuff that most Canadians don't feel day to day that is really important for them to be more broadly aware of. But I just want to, I want to go back because, I gotta say, sir, you are the subject of a few really great profiles in various business publications across Canada, and I was reading some of them and doing my research, and I noted in a recent Globe story, you had been talking about Canada's history with monopolies, chasing back to King Charles II's granting royal charter of the Hudson's Bay Company in 1670. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what has changed since then, and I want to frame that in terms of whether or not you feel like you are in this moment where the attention is back on, actually empowered to do your job or fulfill the mandate. How is that? How is the mission to no longer, whether it's three companies in a trench coat or literally the Hudson's Bay Company in some furs? This seems to be part of our origin story. Are you set up right now in this moment where Canadians are paying attention to deliver to expectations?
Well, certainly better set up than we were a few years ago. And I do have to give credit to the government for that. We received a significant budget increase in 2021, the summer of 2021. That was after, in real dollars, our budget had declined over the previous 10 years leading up to that budget increase. We had fewer employees at the Bureau than 20 years before then, in a much more complex economy. So over 5 years, we're implementing that budget increase. We're bringing on new people. We're bringing on new skills to be more suited to enforcing and promoting competition in the digital economy. So that's very positive. And we're advancing that work. We've created a new branch called the Digital Enforcement and Intelligence Branch.
Okay.
So
this isn't just an opaque budget figure. This is more boots on the ground and more staff to facilitate, to try cases, to research cases. How are you allocating that additional budget?
So we're allocating it across the organization. Our enforcement branches are getting additional investigators. We've created this new branch, as I say, the Digital Enforcement and Intelligence Branch, where we're hiring data scientists, data engineers, behavioral economists, remedies specialists, intelligence. We have a whole intelligence unit within that for proactive intelligence in the digital economy. We're transforming the way we do our work. The money is also allowing us to be on the lookout for new and better technology to do our job better and faster. One of the criticisms we, like many law enforcement agencies, get is we're too slow. And I hear that, and we're trying to use all the
procurement, right, within bureaucracy has been problematic for across the governments.
It's always a challenge. It doesn't happen overnight. There are various checks and balances in place, but we're using those new funds to be out there looking for the best possible tools to do our job in the most efficient and effective way. So there's a lot of positivity at the Bureau around our ability to bring more cases, our ability to detect things earlier, to have greater market intelligence on what's going on out in the marketplace. So very positive. That's number one. The second is last summer, the government made some initial amendments to the Competition Act, what Minister Champagne called an initial down payment on a broader comprehensive review. And those were positive. Those were positive changes from my perspective. We weren't able to pursue wage fixing and no poach agreements between employers before those amendments. Now we are, as of Friday. They are the law of the land last Friday. Changed the penalty provisions for price fixing cartels to remove the cap on fines. Explicitly identified drip pricing as a false and misleading practice.
For our audience, I think people understand the price cap on the fines being a problem because there's probably greater incentive to commit the crime than you can maybe enforce. But I don't think drip pricing is something that Canadians. I guarantee it's something that every Canadian experiences. But I just want to make sure. And again, this is to make sure that everyone listening to this is fully accessible to the details of it. What is drip pricing? Can you give an example?
Yeah, so that's where, for example, on your phone, you get an advertisement that says X product for Y dollars, $20. And okay, that's great. And you start clicking through to purchase. And as you make your way through the purchasing screens, through the purchasing process, you discover near the end, or right at the end, that there are mandatory fees that have been tacked on to that price, not taxes, mandatory fees that the company has put in there saying you have to pay these.
The purchasing fee, the online ordering fee, the Eastern Daylight Standard Time fee, the
exactly.
Okay, so
then you get to the end and it's not $20 plus taxes, it's $27 plus taxes, and behavioral economists have looked at this practice in Canada and around the world and look at, how people behave. Once they get to the end, they've already expended the effort of going through the purchasing process, and they're like, oh, well, whatever, I'll just pay it. But it's false or misleading. It hooks you in at a $20 price, and then at the end, you're up, and you're up to 27. And companies that don't do that aren't going to hook in people out of the gates, and in that way, it's anti-competitive towards those people who are truthful up front in their advertising. And it's certainly more of a prevalent issue in the digital economy because there's this sort of there's these representations on screens that you then move through screens and you get there. So it's something we've been going after for years and have had many, many cases of drip pricing.
Can we expand on that? I want to maybe see if it connects to something you were talking about before in terms of having new tools to identify and fight. And maybe, and we'll get back to some of the other changes that have happened, but I'm really interested in how you prioritize what to attack and maybe what you have access to, because we just described a process that every Canadian listening to this, if they were unfamiliar with drip pricing, were like, oh, that's what that's called. I hate that stuff. And they can think of maybe 5 different examples, but it's a really great example of an anti-competitive practice that maybe, you can only be aware of once you get to the point of purchase. And I'm sure that there are other examples that we come up with that are a little bit more obfuscated than when you were talking about like the 1970s when the Bureau was at its largest, when it was a non-digital environment. I want to ask about how you prioritize, but I'm wondering how much it's connected to what you can identify and demonstrate, because certainly when we talk about some of the perils of social media and digital environments, it's like a lot of bad behaviors that we legislated against an analog broadcast that goes under-observed or just at a much bigger scale online. And instead of, combating, the marketplace where it lives, it's everywhere. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe help us understand maybe where those things connect as you look to prioritize, like, this is the biggest either thing impacting Canadians, or this is the thing impacting Canadians that we're most likely to be able to change or go after.
Well, it's a very good question. It's probably a combination of both. I mean, we have to, we're not like a municipal parking enforcement officer who just gives out the ticket. We have to make allegations, take them to court, and prove those allegations in court. So we have to take, obviously, what kind of evidence we have, what's the strength of the evidence, how much have we captured of that evidence. But then on the flip side, just like you said, we have to look like how pervasive is the harm, how many Canadians are getting duped or misled by this type of conduct when we're talking about false or misleading practices, and then sort of rank our cases, because in the false or misleading practices area, we literally have a never-ending well of cases to go after. And as you say, the digital economy has made it just that much easier for anybody to engage in those types of practices, right?
Yeah.
And, the other problem is from anywhere in the world.
Yes. Okay. Now, let's... there's so many things that we could touch upon here. I want to take that moment and let's just step back for a second, because I know there are other bodies in our functioning government that maybe don't have that limitation. They are not just there to maybe catch and enforce and try. They can actually set the conditions, right? So can you maybe, we didn't really talk about it off the top, describe where your body sits within the rest of the government? Because I'm assuming like one of the limitations here is that you just don't have the power to say, no, companies, you can't do that anymore, right? You're almost tasked with catching people that the Competition Act says shouldn't be doing. Like, you don't own that document, and there's probably we can talk about some of the suggested revisions beyond what you just noted to the Competition Act, things like that. But even just putting where you sit within the where the Bureau sits within the broad populace of the machinery of our government, I think might help people understand a little bit.
Absolutely. So we're an independent law enforcement agency of the federal government. We're part of the federal government. In fact, we're linked to innovation, science, and economic development for administrative purposes. The money that our budget flows through that department.
So you report to Minister Champagne in a certain way, right? Or is his responsibility to direct you?
No. When it comes to enforcing the law, we're independent. The government does not tell us which cases to bring, how to handle those cases when we take them to court, if we want to settle them for a fine, how much fine, all that. We're independent, but we enforce 4 laws, including the Competition Act, and the design of those laws is not under our control. We don't control the policy pen of the laws. We're just another stakeholder that can opine or feed into how the law maybe should be amended.
And so then within that framework, whatever minister owns ISED is probably the one making decisions as to whether or not those laws should be updated and acted, or would be at least a main driver, right? It's not just that you're showing up to ISED's holiday party. There's a direct connection there, right?
Yeah. So Minister Champagne is the person responsible for pushing our budget increase, the person responsible for amending, or at least the cabinet member mainly responsible for amending the Competition Act last summer. Obviously, it went through Parliament. Mm-hmm. And he's the one who launched a comprehensive consultation on the Competition Act in the fall of 2022. And where that consultation has now concluded, and his department is going through all the submissions they received, and they're quite a significant number.
Yes.
With suggestions on how to change, or in some cases, some people say not change, the Competition Act.
Okay. So you have, we were talking about kind of the both awareness and evangelism that is required of your bureau to the average Canadian. How much of that is turned inward to the ministry to say, hey, this is a priority. This is like, or this is where, like, within the government's innovation strategy, let's say, or economic strategy broadly, we need to put more weight on this. Like, what do you have that channel? Are you responsible for those requests, or do you facilitate reviews that then capture information, and then you hope effective decisions are made? I want to note here, this is like, it's pretty novel that these recommendations were like, and this consultation was more publicly accessible than most. Mm-hmm. But I would love for you to just describe, because it's so rare that we have an understanding of, the actual day-to-day process of like how government functions. And I think particularly here, your organization and where it sits and what it's empowered to do, or what it must cooperate on is a really useful thing to dig in on.
Yeah. So we're empowered to advocate for greater competition in all aspects of the federal government's work. And we do that generally very publicly. For example, we're regularly making submissions to the CRTC on ways that they could enhance competition, or competition mm-hmm. issues in matters they're reviewing. We put out various competition promotion documents that are suggestions to the broader government of Canada. For example, that we should do competition impact assessments on all our laws and regulations in Canada to make sure we're not unnecessarily hurting competition through laws or regulations that are meant for some other purpose. So we're very active, and that's what I referred to at the outset as our competition promotion side. We're very active in that way.
Throughout the government as much. Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
But you're not the czar of competition in this format, as you said, in terms of a law enforcement. I hope they give you a badge, and if not a gun, a very expensive calculator. But these other organizations, whether they're under ISED or I guess across government, they don't have an obligation to listen to your recommendations, right? This is just best practices and that you're putting out there. Okay.
And in fact, in some situations, it's laid out in the law that we provide recommendations to other parts of government. The most notable example is transportation, the Ministry of Transportation, on transportation mergers and mm-hmm. and whether they ought to go ahead. And in those situations, and in the past, we've done it several times in the past 3 years. We provide recommendations to the Minister of Transport on, for example, WestJet Sunwing, Air Canada Transat, and it's really just the Bureau or my advice to the Minister of Transport on the competition issues at play in the
Gotcha.
Proposed transaction.
Hey, exciting news for aspiring tech sales professionals. You can kickstart a new career in tech sales and maximize your salary with Sales Camp. Palette Skills is thrilled to announce its transformative 6-week training program aimed at helping individuals unlock their potential in the world of business-to-business tech sales without any previous industry experience. With a comprehensive curriculum, including rapid training, career coaching, mentorship, networking with industry experts, potential job placement, and other growth opportunities, SalesCamp provides the perfect launchpad for a rewarding career. Applications for the upcoming programs, which will start on August 14th for British Columbia and September 5th for Ontario, are now open. So take charge of your future and apply now at
paleteskills.org/programs/salescamp. Maybe before we get into the rest of the Competition Act modernization recommendations, I'm wondering, do you feel generally heard within the various halls that you're submitting these recommendations and reports for? Like, how is that advocacy product, I would say, or how's that advocacy process federally going for you?
I think going back to my earlier comments about competition being more of a kitchen table issue in Canada right now, we're certainly heard, I think, much more in that context, because people are seeing that it is an issue that really, really matters to average Canadians. And so when the Bureau makes recommendations on competition, I think people take them seriously. They don't always follow our advice. There's no doubt about that. But certainly they take them seriously.
Okay. With the current recommendations in the consultation process, knowing that there are a variety of recommendations, what would be some of the highlights or the standouts that you would think might directly interest this audience? Or honestly, might not interest them, but you're like, this is the thing that I need to do my job better, because I'm open to hearing that as well. We can go as inside baseball as you think is relevant.
Well, I'll take it outside baseball, hopefully, and hopefully I'll do a good bouncing ball here. So Canadians are concerned about corporate concentration. We have high levels of corporate concentration. And when there's high levels of corporate concentration, there is arguably significantly diminished competition in various sectors, right? Mm-hmm. So corporate concentration often comes about through mergers. Two companies merging, take one player out of the mix, you have fewer players competing, competition can inevitably decline. So in our recommendations to the government, we made over 50 recommendations of changes to the Competition Act, specific changes. And of those 50 plus, at least 16 were to modernize the Bureau's merger review laws. That is our ability to block anti-competitive mergers in the public interest. This has been described by previous commissioners, not me, as Canada having the weakest merger review law of all advanced economies. It's very permissive. In fact, it makes it very difficult for the Bureau to prevent anti-competitive mergers. So we have 16 recommendations.
Winning the trial, or prevent in what way? Like, what are you looking for to empower you? Just an easier condition to demonstrate, or just maybe just we say no. This obviously doesn't understand, because I think I'm not really sure to what extent you can speak to certain cases. I think everyone's been reading about things going on with Rogers, but to your point previously, you have to go try that case and win it. What in these recommendations makes it easier for you to block, or to maybe to bring that to bear? Is it an evidence component? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So a lot of our recommendations are basically, hey, let's catch up to the rest of the world in terms of how they review mergers. For example, here's a great example. In many of our peer countries, our closest allies, when there's a merger, the remedy for that merger, if it's going to lessen competition, is to restore competition to what it was before the merger. Okay? So that the go forward world is, okay, we've got the same level of competition we had before the merger. That's not the case in Canada. In Canada, the remedy is the test is a substantial lessening of competition. And all you have to do is take the substantial out to remedy the problem. So there can still be a lessening of competition. Gotcha. So you can see.
So you're not even fighting on the terms of improving competition. You're fighting on how restricting how weak the competition becomes after some of these mergers. Like you can't try to improve. You're holding the line, and if the line moves slowly over time, our laws are okay with that.
It's weakening over time, absolutely. Okay. And we're out of line with the United States, with the United Kingdom, with the European Union on our, on that aspect of our work. And that's one example. We have this efficiencies test where and this is maybe getting a bit too into the weeds, but where basically if the parties merging can establish that the efficiencies that come out of the merger, that is like cutting the number of employees, cutting the number of trucking routes, if those are bigger than the anti-competitive effects, then in our law, there's an absolute sort of green light. If you can establish that there's more of those than there are anti-competitive effects, the merger goes ahead. And we're the only country in the world with that.
Okay. So I don't think, sir, that we are too far in the weeds, because I think in the weeds lie the problem. And it's important for Canadians to understand when they're reading the paper day to day and seeing like, man, why is this? How could this circumstance not be anti-competitive? That we need to understand the conditions in which it's being evaluated. And it's an interesting notion for me to even understand how a case could be made that greater efficiencies could come from these things that would outweigh the that seems incredibly abstract to me, but then also just like a poor framing for how we should be reviewing this.
Well, and then it becomes a question of economists measuring, the efficiencies and measuring the anti-competitive effects, and it becomes very quantification focused. And we saw this last summer, July 2021. We were trying to get an injunction against two oil field waste companies merging in the West. And at the injunction stage, the tribunal came up with a new test. The federal court came up with a new test that we had to quantify at the injunction stage all the anti-competitive effects. And we hadn't done that, and they allowed the merger to close pending the trial, and we got the results of the trial a few months ago. And in the decision at the conclusion of the trial, where they said effectively the Bureau was right on many aspects of the trial, they said it's difficult to conceive of a more anti-competitive merger. But we hadn't got our injunction in July 2021. The merger closed. The companies, merged, and there were anti-competitive effects from then until now. In that case is in front of the Federal Court of Appeals, so there's not much I can say about it, but that, that sort of quantification necessary puts a tremendous burden on the Bureau to prevent harm in the short term.
Because you're not even holding the line here. The line is on a speeding bus, and you're kind of trying to chase it down and get it to pull over and stop, right? Like this thing is, you don't have the full power to enforce a pause in this regard, which I think is, I think this is a great example for anyone who plays video games out there, seeing how various governments around the world have treated the proposed Microsoft Activision merger. It seems we're describing a very different scenario here in Canada. I'm wondering, before we move forward, are there other broad components of the 50 plus recommendations that are worth kind of highlighting in relation to this? Because
Sure.
it definitely seems like you are you are playing on a higher degree of difficulty when it comes to trying these things. And we talked about additional resources to capture information and stuff like that. Is there another component of here that's worthy of just noting high level?
Sure, absolutely. And it's what we refer to as market study powers. So all our G7 counterparts have these market study powers, which is they can say, okay, we're going to go look at this aspect of the economy and see if there are competition problems. And if there are competition problems, we can make recommendations to government as to how to fix those competition problems. And as part of those market studies, they have the power to compel information from the companies involved in the market. Say, give us this information. We want to better understand. We want to help, have a more competitive economy. We don't have those powers. We don't have the power to compel information. And this is, sort of coming out in the news today with our retail grocery market study. We can do market studies, but the only way we get data or information is on a voluntary basis from players in the marketplace.
Gotcha. So if a certain grocer tells you that that's what the price of bread should be, or if a certain telecom says, listen, man, we have the most secure networks or whatever, this is our ARPU, we're not making money on this, blah, blah, blah. You can't compel them to give you all the data that would indicate that statement. You just, whatever they give you is what you got.
No, yeah. In a market study, yeah. And the reality is that, once again, I sound like a broken record, sorry, but the reality is that many of our counterparts have these powers, and they've been used to do incredible things in their economy. And the best example is the United Kingdom did a market study into open banking, and that drove them moving forward on open banking. The market study that they conducted in that area, and gave advice to the government, which the government followed, which they pushed ahead on open banking. That's a great example. There are multiple. I can give you examples from all over the world.
Well, let's stick on the open banking one, because I think, while we're really digging into this competition conversation, I do think from the other spheres that BetaKit plays in, it's worth noting that, whether or not that a market study on open banking would have helped, we've had the recommendations in front of Azar for a year and a half, and there's been nothing but delays anyway. So I think, importantly, I made a joke about you needing a badge and a gun. It seems like there are other tools that your bureau could really benefit from, but this isn't necessarily a silver bullet, because even when we, when the current federal government sets as one of their in their mandate letter making open banking happen, it doesn't seem to make it any faster. So and I'm not expecting you to comment on that, but just to set in context that this is I don't think we're positioning you as the singular hope for changing the way our economy functions, because there's additional considerations here. I'm wondering, maybe
of course, you know that we came out in support of open banking and data portability as a driver of competitive forces competition many years ago.
Yes, it's been a long time waiting, and I think for people who know BetaKit's reporting and the conversations we have, there's definitely going to be more to come in the fall in that regard on open banking and where it sits. But we're talking, we just talked about your bureau not being the only player in having a more competitive market to benefit Canadians. You recently kind of, Justice Leagued up a bit with a couple other government departments in announcing the Canadian Digital Regulators Forum. You're working with the CRTC and the OPC, which is the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. If anyone is unfamiliar, again, a super important role in the digital age that we live in right now. Can you talk about what this group is about and why it's needed? Because I think, we've talked a lot about Bills C11, C18, C27. There are some major dramatic changes coming to society and our economies driven by new technology. And it seems like some of the global players driving that technology are able to run circle around individual governments when it comes to this, but it seems to be usually because there's not a whole of government approach to address it. How much of this new body is in response to that, or just the need for you to have better channels of communication between, I guess, organization? Is this a commitment to better work together amongst the organizations you were previously probably handing recommendations to? Is it an info sharing? Is it a co-enforcement body? Like, I'm really hoping that this is where you say, yeah, we've, as a in some sort of Power Rangers circumstance, we all kind of get together and form a more powerful entity to enact this stuff. But I'm sure it's a little bit more detailed than that. I'd love for you to walk us through this.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've worked together for some time. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner, the CRTC, and the Bureau. We work on Canada's anti-spam legislation. We've done that for years. We work together bilaterally, but there are obstacles to the levels of cooperation that we've been able to have in the past. There's no doubt about that, and some of those are addressed in some of the legislation that you just referenced, in terms of enhancing our ability to cooperate, enhancing our ability to share information, and specifically in those pieces of legislation, C11, C17, C27, if I'm getting them right, C18, I mean, there's reference to, the Competition Commissioner, there's reference to the Privacy Commissioner, there's reference to the CRTC. So what's happening, and you've already made reference to this, is our worlds are intersecting more and more and more and more in the digital economy. And so, like other countries who've done this as well, including the United Kingdom, the group of us, thought it would be a great idea to bring this digital regulators forum together and to work on the emerging tech issues that are of common interest, to have working groups between our different agencies, understanding how new technological developments, how they impact our various lines of work, how it might mean we have to cooperate more, or understand, who might do what given a certain development, to pool our resources. If, for example, we wanted to have somebody come in and explain to us how X or Y works, why should we be doing that in silos? We should be figuring these things out together, not necessarily so that, we'll say, okay, well, only one of us is going to enforce blah, blah, blah. It's because our mandates intersect, but they're also separate sometimes. It's just good common sense, quite frankly, to be talking often, to be tackling the emerging issues, the key issues that cross all our desks. And we're going to look at things like artificial intelligence. I mean, it's obviously the thing of the day, but how is that going to manifest itself in terms of competition law enforcement, in terms of privacy? How's the CRTC going to deal with it in their work? These are cross-cutting issues, and it would be almost negligent if we weren't doing this.
Yeah, I think most Canadians can agree, and I think particularly when we're talking about from a digital perspective, it's hard to see any business or service not touching upon competition, privacy, or probably the CRTC's mandate, right? But I'm wondering, like, what you expect the outputs of that to look like, and the working relationship to work like, because I think as Vas has noted on a previous editions of this podcast, where we've absolutely lost our mind about the state of competition in Canada, like the CRTC doesn't necessarily have a mandate for competition, or they don't consider it to be one of their North Stars to guide some of their recommendations or how they enforce the space they're responsible for. So are they looking for you to come in on that, or are you once again in a position to kind of advocate to them, like, listen, we really need to, you need to take this in fuller effect, or are they charitably hamstrung maybe by some of the acts that they must follow and enforce? Like, how does that how do you see this in actual reality working and providing benefit beyond just the fact that it should obviously be there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be fair for me talk on behalf of the CRTC. Obviously, they do.
Sure, would be interesting though, wouldn't it?
They do have a competition element to their mandate. There's no doubt about that, and I think you see the new chair, Vicky Atreides, has a very healthy competition background, and there are multiple people over there who have healthy competition backgrounds. So that's certainly very positive from my perspective. But how it's going to work is, as I said, we're going to examine, at least initially, as we're just getting off the ground here, but at least initially we're going to examine issues of common interest and understand those issues and how they're playing out in the economy and how they might touch each of our mandates and where they might intersect on our mandates and how best to go about dealing with that in our work, either in our enforcement work or in our role as subject matter experts for the government of Canada on competition, on privacy, and providing evidence-based advice to the government on these things. If we're on top of it and know how it's manifesting itself, I think we can provide a tremendous service, both internally to ourselves and to each other, but also to the broader government, to maybe even governments at all levels in Canada.
When do you expect that to start coming into play? And maybe I'll extend that to say, when would you hope to see some of those consultation recommendations on the Competition Act actually come into play, turn into legislature, and be part of your tool set? Like, are we talking, is this a 2023 thing or a 2024 thing?
The most recent consultation?
Yes. That is currently being reviewed.
Yeah, so the extent of my understanding is they've closed the consultation. They have a whole bunch of submissions, hundreds. They're going to review those. They're probably doing that now, and at some point they will announce what their next steps are. I don't know what the next steps are.
Okay, so you don't have any track timeline, or maybe you expect a timeline of, say, hey, in Q2 of 2024 we can start using this stuff. Like, you're kind of flying blind there. What would your hope be?
I think it would have to be a bill amending the Competition Act. Would have to be, if they were going to do that, then that would be the next logical major step, and I have no idea when that would be introduced.
Okay, I just think it's important
to be introduced.
Yeah,
right. I'm not. It's not my role. In the whole consultation, the Bureau was a party like other parties, putting in our recommendations. Our recommendations were based on our extensive experience enforcing the Act, as well as our deep knowledge of competition laws and regimes around the world, how they work, how they differ from Canada. So we were putting it in. We put it in transparently in the public realm. It's out there for everybody to read. And so we're kind of, we're in a position much like many of the other people who made submissions.
Okay. I think that's really important to note, simply because, as we said off the top, over the last 3 years or so, Canadians have become more and more interested in, or this has become a kitchen table conversation around competition. I think along similar timelines, due to the pandemic or other things, Canadians also became, and I would say citizens around the world for their various governments, became much more familiar with how their institutions function, the limitations of those institutions. So I think it's important for us to level set on, hey, just because there are some recommendations, we should understand what it takes to get that to be in process, and maybe who owns the responsibility, right? I'm wondering then, given looking at, I'm sure you can't speak to any specific cases. I'm wondering maybe if you could share any lessons learned from your tenure, because you have, over this period of time, fought a few cases, had some success, had some very, I think, public losses, which I think underscore the importance of this stuff. And, not to put too fine a point on it, we're in a circumstance right now where Rogers got what it wanted. tech savvy isn't, companies of its ilk aren't in a position to truly compete, and are looking for solutions there. And the minister that appointed you now works for Rogers. So I'm wondering if, like, I don't know, I don't want to say maybe like how do you feel like this tenure has been and how far you've moved the needle forward, but I'm really maybe giving you an open-ended way to talk to people about how far you think this has moved, anything you've learned from this process, what you would want maybe them to carry forward and think about, pay attention more, anything there, because it's obvious that you have been pushing forward, and I'm just wondering how you feel about the level of success there, or maybe the circumstances and the rules in which the game you play.
So, I mean, I think a big part of my job is doing the right thing. And doing the right thing is when you have the evidence that shows that you should bring a case, you bring a case. And as far as the Rogers Shaw case is concerned, I continue to stand behind our decision to bring that case. I stand behind our incredible team of investigators and lawyers who did an amazing job. And we brought that case for the right reasons, for the right legal principles, based on the right evidence. And, the outcome is the outcome. We disagree with it. Mm-hmm. That's the reality. I don't think you're doing your job as a law enforcer if you only bring 100% winning cases. But I think it's important that, and I come from a background of actually going to court and prosecuting cases. And yeah, I would be, once again, to go back to the negligence, I would be negligent if I wasn't bringing cases. And I believe to my very heart that it was a responsible case to bring. And I stand by it, and I stand by our team. I think the lesson that maybe to be learned by the legal and business community is that the Bureau is tooled up and increasingly better tooled up. We're ready, willing, and able to litigate, and we will litigate if necessary. Sometimes you lose, but that's the arena we're in. We're not in the happiness business. We got to bring the right cases at the right times. You can't shy away from an appropriate fight. And we'll continue to do that. I think the bigger question that, you have to ask is, what's the risk of not taking action? And that's a question we're asking more and more. So, as you say,
and I think people are seeing the results of it being the same old more and more than in prior years, right?
Yeah. I mean, and we've brought we've filed 5 merger challenges in the last 4 years or less. 2 of them settled after we filed the challenge. So the parties, agreed to terms of a settlement that were acceptable to the Bureau. Obviously, Rogers Shaw, we weren't successful, and it was, very unprecedented in the way the whole thing went down. There was another case involving grain elevators in the West that we weren't successful on. But although it's before the Federal Court of Appeal now, we were successful on another matter involving Secure and Tervita, oil waste management companies in the West. So, you have to bring the cases where the evidence shows you should. And for as long as I'm still in the job, we'll keep doing that. And if it highlights problems with the law, so be it.
Yeah. I think that's incredibly well said and well taken. And I think most Canadians would agree with you in terms of the responsibility to bring this stuff forward. I also just think the 3 examples that you gave across a variety of industries kind of showcases how broad of a impact this stuff can have given the mandate of competition. Like you were telecom, grain, energy like a different day. You're in entirely different sectors because this impacts all sectors. I think probably people coming into this who have, as you had said, been a little bit more aware of this, is a little bit much more top of mind through this conversation, have a better understanding of the mechanisms of this. And I think some of the points of change that could allow you to fulfill your mandate more. I'm wondering if you have an ask, a call to action, a place where you can say, okay, as a Canadian citizen, you are mad as hell. You're not going to take it anymore. You're tired of Douglas bringing competition and open banking into every podcast that he does, regardless if that's the topic. They've listened to this. They buy into the importance. Now what? Next step. Do you want them reading the Competition Act recommendation changes, or like where do they go to participate in the process? Because we are a democracy. The government works for us, but we have to instill it with that trust and oftentimes aid it. Where do you want people of the Free Boswell army going to participate?
I quite frankly, I think that something we really need in this country is a whole of government, at all levels of government, emphasis on competition. There's the side of stuff I deal with, which is enforcement of the act, but there's a whole nother issue, which is public restraints on competition in Canada. And we are second last in the OECD on public restraints on competition that hinder and hold back our economy. We've dropped significantly in the World Bank's ease of doing business. We haven't had a whole of government approach to competition like they've had in Australia, like they've had in the United States. This is what we desperately need as a country. In 2008, in the Wilson report, which was a report on, reviewing competition in Canada, they said, Canada is a country that traditionally has not placed significant enough emphasis on competition in the organization of its affairs. That was true in 2008. That's true now. We need all levels of government to say, okay, how can we allow for more competition and allow our economy to boom? I would invite people to go look at what the Australians did in the 90s. They basically allowed their economy to boom, huge increases in GDP as a result of all the work they did on government barriers to competition and allowing more competition in the economy. And we can all think of the day-to-day examples that are easy to think of, and the Bureau's done lots of work in these little examples, like food trucks. There's all these regulations in municipalities about where food trucks can park in relation to restaurants. And they can't be within so many meters and this and that. Why?
If you're east of Yonge Street in Toronto, a food truck cannot legally exist, I think. I think it just dissipates into thin air due to various bylaws.
These are municipal barriers to competition that came into place somehow, some way, that don't allow the economy to thrive, that don't allow a small enterprise to get set up and people to own their own business and to compete. And obviously, ride sharing and Uber and Lyft were very controversial for taxi cab drivers and medallion owners. But look what it did to the level of competition, the level of service people received when they were getting into cars to take them somewhere. There are so many examples in our economy where we should be looking and saying, okay, let's get that barrier to competition out of the way. Let's let a more inclusive economy where people can really enter and open businesses and participate and hire people. It would do incredible things for our GDP. That's putting aside things like interprovincial trade barriers, foreign restrictions on investment. There's so much we could do as a country to unleash our economic potential and to increase our GDP significantly. So I would ask people to think about that and to encourage that at all levels of government, because we could do so much more if we were, and as I say, we're second last in the OECD for product market regulations that hinder competition in our country. That's a big deal.
It's a great point. It's the whole other side of the coin that we really didn't discuss. I'm gonna have to work hard to see how we turn that into a hashtag for a T-shirt, but it's definitely a lot to chew on. Sir Commissioner, it has been wonderful speaking to you about this. I'm so glad we were able to do it. I think it's been very helpful letting people know how you do your job, how the government works, and places that they can participate in. And provide support and what support is needed. So thank you for this. I look forward to our next conversation where, due to various podcasting acts coming into play, you will be required to be wearing one of these T-shirts. So just be forewarned.
Hopefully you have large sizes.
Yes.
That was fun. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciated the opportunity to talk about these issues.